Hi, welcome to videos at Hi, welcome to videos at the Ville. This is Professor Charles Greenewalt, and this is Public Administration, Government 241. Why, we have a few things to discuss yet that we don't have PowerPoints for, so it's very important that you pay attention to your readings in your textbook. Very important that you pay attention to this lecture. Those items have to do with program review and policy analysis, number one, and number two, they have to do with budgeting. So I want to turn for a minute to program evaluation and policy analysis. And when I talk about policy analysis, what I'm going to be talking about here exclusively is benefit cost analysis. Well, first of all, we ought to look at what the difference is. What's the difference between a program review and a policy analysis? We have to remember that a program review is done on an ex post facto basis. When we are conducting a program review, we are trying to determine if an existing program is working or not working. Is it delivering what we had hoped for, or is it not delivering the result that we had hoped for? So its program review is ex post facto. Benefit cost analysis or policy analysis is looking into the future. We're looking at what we want to accomplish, we're looking at the ways that are available to accomplish it, and then we are trying to study and analyze which of those ways is the most efficient and effective. So we have program review, looking at something that's already there and trying to determine if it's working. And then, so it's an ex post facto analysis. Then we have policy analysis, which is trying to look into the future. All right. So it's important to understand those time differences. Okay. We find that when we look at policy analysis, the one thing you have to be aware of, those of you who are in other disciplines besides simply government or international studies, is that there are some studies, some disciplines in the social sciences that will try to develop what their own form, their own brand of policy analysis. But it's interesting to note they are specifically developing those in a way to avoid the true results of benefit cost analysis and avoid looking at what a true benefit cost analysis would reveal about their program. But I'll let you be the judge of those instances in your lifetime as you go through your career. Well, let's take a look at one of the let's look at one of the things that we find that some academic disciplines want to do their own type of policy analysis and don't do a sound benefit cost analysis. We find that some areas of study do not like benefit cost analysis. One, they don't like benefit cost analysis because they may not like what it shows or reveals. Number two, some don't like benefit cost analysis because they don't understand it. Number three, some may not like benefit cost analysis because they don't know how to do it. Number four, we find that there are some disciplines that do not like benefit cost analysis because they will tell you that the results of their efforts, the results of their program cannot be measured and certainly cannot be quantified. We all know that there are some programs, for example, that are specifically geared to, for example, saving lives. And there'll be many people in social science will say, well, we can't put the value on a human life. But in fact, I'm here to share with you that in this type of analysis, I can put a value on anything, and it's better to try to quantify your situation to determine what to do in the future than not to. And we can quantify anything. It may not be perfect, but it's better than operating by our intuition or operating based on incrementalism. Now, let's go back to that example for a moment of some people that don't like benefit cost analysis because, for example, they'd say that you can't quantify things. For example, you can't quantify the value of life. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. In fact, my contention is you can quantify the value of life, and we've done it for decades. Again, they're not perfect methods of analysis, but they're better than using intuition. They're better than using incrementalism. What would be the ways that we could value a human life, for example? Well, the most common one, and the one that you would come up with and you would tell me about if I were to ask in class, would be what? Well, it would be lifetime earnings. Your value as a human being is what you earn during the course of a lifetime. That's one way of looking at it. Now, what are the shortcomings of this method? Well, obviously, some people are closer to the end of their career than others. So their earnings will be smaller, their earnings will be diminished. How about retired people? They don't have any future earnings perhaps at all. So one could say that their life is not worth anything. Well, I know some of my retired relatives wouldn't like that assessment, but that would be the shortcoming of this type of analysis. The second way that we could quantify the value of a life would be the amount of resources that your friends, your family, that you are willing to set forth to sustain your life. A number of years ago, there was a woman in New Jersey who was in a car accident, and she had to be put on life support. Well, they quickly ran through her savings. Then they, some years later, ran through her family's entire savings. They no longer had any money to provide income for life support. So the community and the state decided, okay, we'll kick in money and we will pay to support her life. And they did, again, for, I guess, something on the order of 3 years. And at some point, then that program's money was used, and the decision was made to take her off life support, and that was done. And lo and behold, what happened? She breathed on her own. She lived another several years, and the state then paid for that, but didn't have to pay for life support. So the second way that we can value a human life is the resources that can be mustered to support you in whatever medical condition you might be. Well, what are the problems with this? Well, the problems with this type of assessment, this type of analysis, would be that, again, the value of human life from a wealthy family would be much more than the value of a life of someone from a poor or moderate income family. And is that fair? Well, obviously it's not fair, but that is what this type of analysis leads to. So that's the second way we have of determining what the value of a life is worth. How many resources can be mustered to support it. The third way that we have to value a human life is based on government work, what government judgments that are made. For example, when I lived in Virginia and I lived in Ferrum, and I was teaching at Ferrum College, the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Commonwealth Transportation Department had a policy at that point that they would straighten a curve in any highway if that would result in saving one life per year. And they said they would straighten the curve and they would save that life if they could do it for $75,000 or less. This would have been in 1982, 1981, 82. So, yes, I'm sorry, it would have been 1982, right, 1982. So they were saying that the value of a human life was worth somewhere between $75,000. They'd straighten out a curve if they could save one life. If it would be, it could be done for $75,000 or less. So they were telling us that each and every one of our lives was worth $75,000. That is a assessment or an evaluation, an assessment that the government made. In this case, the state government of Virginia. Another way of doing it would be the combat pay that is given to servicemen when they go from a peacetime situation to a war zone and their lives are actually in peril. Their pay increases. It's combat pay. And the difference between their normal pay and their combat pay would be what the government has determined that their life might be worth. So that's another way that the government can make an estimation that what a life is worth. Another way that the government does it is, for example, for some of the most highly trained individuals in the world would be whom? They would be who? They would be jet fighter pilots to be able to fly an F-14, F-16, F-18. Now we're into the F-35. Be able to fly one of these planes is one of the most technically difficult tasks in the world. And we find that how much the Air Force is willing to spend, the Air Force and or the Navy is willing to spend on the ejection system for those pilots, that shows or determines the value of their life. What will the U.S. Navy pay for an injection system to save the life of their pilots from the seat of an F-35 that might be going down in the drink? So this is another way, another example of how the government goes ahead and commits to actions that show us the value of a human life. Okay, well, having said that, let's go back to program review and let's take a look at how do we actually conduct a program review. What is done? How do we do one? Well, the first thing that we have to do in conducting a program review to try to see if a program is working or if it is not working is that, excuse me for a moment. Well, even before, let me backtrack for a moment. Before we look, you can see I'm having difficulty reading my own notes. Before we talk about how to do it, we first ought to talk about why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? We want to do a program review for a number of reasons. We want to do a program review to see if we want to continue or discontinue the program, right? Well, we want to do a program review to determine whether or not we want to continue or discontinue the program. Number two, we want to do a program review to see if we could perhaps improve some of the practices of the program and make it better. Number three, we want to take a look at whether or not we should add or if we should drop certain program strategies. Should we add or drop certain program strategies? Number four, we want to determine whether or not we want to institute this program in another jurisdiction or not. Is this program that good that it's worthy of being instituted, replicated elsewhere? And number five, we want to do a program review to determine if we should allocate resources from one program to another. If the program review shows that this program is just working fabulously, maybe we want to take resources from a program that's not working so well and put them into this program. Or if this program is not working well, maybe we want to take a look at taking some of its resources and putting them in more promising areas of endeavor. Okay, so that's why we do a program review. To continue, or do we have to answer the questions, do we want to continue or discontinue the program? Can we improve any of its practices? Should we add or drop certain specific program strategies? Should we institute similar programs elsewhere? And need we reallocate resources that are devoted to this program? Okay, now we get to the the material on how do we go about doing a program review. Well, first of all, we have to identify all the goals of the program. And we have to be certain that we do identify all the goals of the program, because if we're only going to evaluate some of the goals, then we're doing a fragmentary evaluation. We're not doing a full evaluation if we don't know all the goals of the program. We have to identify all the goals of the program, number one. Number two, we have to translate our goals into measurable indicators. We have to translate our goals into measurable indicators. For example, while we were building the metro system in Washington, D.C., it was decided that everyone in Washington, D.C. should have access to the metro, with the exception of one particular location. One location absolutely insisted they didn't want anything to do with the metro, and they didn't want any subway station located near them. That happened to be, if you haven't heard before, you didn't know, that was the neighborhood of Georgetown. Georgetown didn't want any part of the metro system. They were served by a bus system already. I came up Pennsylvania Avenue, and they believed that only more riffraff would be delivered into Georgetown by a subway system, so they didn't want a subway stop there. And to this day, they don't have one. But at any rate, what the metro system tried to do, if we were going to make subway transportation available to everyone in D.C., they tried to locate all of their subway stations in such a manner across the District of Columbia that one could take a compass that's used for a map geometrically. You take your compass, you set the protractor at a quarter of a mile, what would amount to a quarter of a mile on the scale of the map. And then you would set it at each and every subway station, and you draw a circle. And if you find that all the areas of DC are covered by the circles that have been drawn, then you have provided subway transportation to everyone in DC, because everyone would be within 440 yards of a station. So that was the measurement that was considered to be reasonable, that everyone could walk a quarter of a mile to a subway station. So to make the subway available to everyone would have to be within a quarter of a mile of a subway station. So first we find the goals of the program. We translate the goals into measurable indicators. Then number 3, we collect data. And number 4, we compare the data. Now, how do we compare data? There's a number of ways to compare data that we've collected. For example, if we want to know, say we're looking at crime prevention programs, and we would like to know if one might be working, we're going to put up mercury vapor lights in downtown Lancaster, and we hope that that will reduce crime. Well, the one thing that we can do, of course, is we can have before and after comparisons. before the mercury vapor lights, this is how much crime there was. After the mercury vapor lights, this is how much crime there was. So we can have before-after comparisons. We can also do time trend projections. Time trend projections would have on a graph the amount of crime in several years coming up to the present day. How much crime was there in downtown Lancaster in 2016, in 2017, 2018, 2019. And then what we would do is use our normal skills that we have in geometry to try to locate a slope, what would be a geometric slope, through those data points, and we would continue that across the graph to 2020, the present year, and we could then project what the data show us from past years. The data is shaping up in such a way that the crime rate should be this, and we can see if that has been true or not. So we can do a before versus after comparison when we're comparing data. We can do a time trend analysis. The third way we can do it is we can simply compare ourselves to another city, compare one jurisdiction to another without any reference to the comparability of the jurisdictions. It would be, for example, we'll compare Harrisburg to Easton, Pennsylvania. Easton, Pennsylvania may not have anything in common. Did I say Harrisburg? I didn't mean to, I meant Lancaster. Easton, Pennsylvania has perhaps little in common with Lancaster, but we'll just compare what the crime was in the downtowns before and after a certain point. In the case of Lancaster, it would be before and after the mercury vapor lighting went on, and in Easton, we could do the same thing and make a comparison and to see how we're doing. The fourth and final way to compare data is called the Cadillac of evaluation. You find it's controlled experimentation. In controlled experimentation, what you do is you try to find another jurisdiction that is exactly like your jurisdiction. You want to find a jurisdiction that's about the same size, same population, has the same type of economy, has about the same mixture of old and young, African American and Caucasian and Latino, about the same breakdown in terms of religions, this many Christians, this many Jews, this many Muslims. You're trying to get jurisdictions that are as close as possible to one another. Now, frequently over the years, we've seen that Lancaster is what the Red Rose City and York is the White Rose City. We could perhaps determine that I keep on saying Harrisburg, Lancaster and York are very similar to one another. They're very similar to one another. So we could compare Harrisburg, there I died again. We could compare Lancaster with York. Lancaster, before and after they got the light, and York, the same thing, and see what the effect might be. So we can do this controlled experimentation. Now, when we use controlled experimentation, there's a couple things that we have to bear in mind. When we're doing controlled experimentation, we have to bear in mind that if it's working very, very well, let's say that mercury vapor lighting is reducing crime, and we're using it, we find that it's a great success in Lancaster. If we are not using it in another jurisdiction then, and it's working like gangbusters in Lancaster, what are we doing to the other jurisdiction that's interested in knowing? We are making them continue to have high crime. They're paying the price. These is the same kind of situation that we have in drug trials. When a experimental drug is working very well, but we find that in controlled experimentation, we have some people taking that drug, and they would be thriving, and other people would be on a placebo, and they might be dying. How long, if the drug is working very well, how long are you going to continue those people on those placebos? Are we willing to take their lives essentially to prove a point? This is another quandary, another ethical dilemma of controlled experimentation. Another problem that we have is simply the Hawthorne effect, of course. Remember the Hawthorne effect, that when people know they're being observed, they're going to behave differently than they would in an ordinary situation, an ordinary life. So when people know they're being observed, we may not be getting accurate results. Again, just as Elton Mayo didn't receive those accurate results in the Hawthorne plant of General Electric, or it was Western Electric, in Illinois at the time. Okay, well, if you have questions about program review, contact me and I'll be happy to try to answer them for you. Let's go on now and let's look at benefit cost analysis. What are we doing with benefit cost analysis? We're trying to what? Gaze into the future. We're trying to deal with trying to solve a problem, and we're looking at all the possible ways that we can solve that problem and which would be the most efficient and effective. How are we going to find that? Well, couple different, how do we go about doing a benefit cost analysis? This is rather cursory. This is rather rudimentary. We'll have to spend a bit more time if you decide that you're going to do one, or you're involved with studying one. You have to take another look at this and be a bit more precise, but broadly we go about doing it this way. First of all, we have to have consensus that there's a problem, and the problem needs some type of mitigation or some type of solution. Then we have to pin down, we have to have a brainstorming session what all the possible alternatives might be to solving this particular problem. Then we have to have another brainstorming session to try to narrow down those alternatives to just several. Once we nail the alternatives down, what are the best, most promising ones, and what we have to do a benefit cost analysis is we have to go about indeed identifying all the benefits of one program or another versus all the costs of the same program. And we have to try to be quite exhaustive. One thing I want you to realize that it's much easier to identify costs than it is to identify benefits. Please remember that. It's much easier to identify costs than it is to identify benefits. You'll find that we have to bear in mind that some costs and some benefits, for example, might be psychic. I'm a researcher and I'm trying to identify the true costs of putting an oil refinery on the other side of the bay. Well, to identify all the costs of that project, one of the costs would be a psychic cost to the residents of that part of the bay. How do I get at that? Well, there isn't one best way, but the way I know of would be I would visit the residents on that part of the bay, and I'd simply ask them, how much money would you like to receive that would drive the memory of that, should say this way, how much money would you need to be able to tolerate the sight of that oil refinery across the bay? And if they would tell you, if you gave me $500,000, if you gave me $1 million, if you gave me $750,000, I could stand that site, the site of that oil refinery, then we have got at their psychic benefits, in this case, psychic costs, haven't we? We've gotten at their psychic costs. So I believe there's always a way to quantify things. We just have to dig a little bit and be imaginative in how we go about doing it. So we have to identify all the costs and all the benefits, and we have to be careful to make sure that we identify psychic costs and psychic benefits. We also have to be careful of the element of time. We find that some costs and some benefits will be in the future. If costs and benefits are in the future, we have to use the same time frame when we're comparing all costs and benefits. So we have to put future benefits and future costs into something that we call PV, or present value. In order to put something in present value, we have to engage in something that we call discounting. To put a dollar that's received 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years in the future, what is that value worth today? What is that value worth today? And we have a very elementary equation that will translate the sum of any money for us into present value dollars. It's easy to use. All we need to know is the amount of time, and we need to know the interest rate. If we have those, we put them in the equation, and anyone with little math ability can determine what the present value of dollar would be in 5 years or 10 years or 100 years. So we have to make sure that all the costs and benefits are identified. We have to make sure we have all the psychic ones. We have to make sure that we've discounted all the benefits and the costs for time. Okay, now once we do that, other things that we have to do before we add up our costs and our benefits, we have to throw out sunk costs. We've talked about sunk costs in class before. We have to go through all of our costs and make sure that we know which ones of those have been done in the past. There's nothing that can be done about them because it's already the commitment of time and resources and effort has already been committed. So there's nothing we can do about it. So we throw that out of the equation. We also want to throw out pecuniary costs and benefits. Now, what is a pecuniary cost and benefit? Pecuniary, P-U-C-U-N-I-A-R-Y. Pecuniary cost and benefit would be essentially it's an offsetting cost and benefit. For example, I may be looking at just before I went to graduate school at UVA in Charlottesville, the highway department, state highway department, was deciding that they needed to improve east-west transportation in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And at that time, the east-west transportation in the center of the state was provided by Route 250. Route 250 went from, and it may have started in Norfolk or Hampton Roads, I'm not sure, but definitely went from there to Richmond, and out of Richmond it went west to Charlottesville, west to Waynesboro, west to Stanton, Virginia, and west from there. The highway department was trying to improve upon that, and was the best way to expand it, was the best way to build another road, was the best way to put in a train line, was the best way to put in more air service. Ultimately, the highway department decided the best way was to the best way was to put in a new road, to expand the road system, to put in a new road. So they put in what today we know as of Route 64. Route 64 starts in Hampton Roads and travels then west to Richmond, Charlottesville, Waynesboro, Stanton, and then on west from there, I guess all the way to Cincinnati. But you find that as we looked at this project, for example, one of the costs of building Route 64 would be that, well, there's Henrietta's Diner in Palmyra, Virginia. We find that that diner would be losing a lot of business because the trucks and the cars will be on the main road now, and they'll be bypassing the restaurant, and they won't be stopping. So they will lose a certain amount of traffic, and that will be a cost, an economic cost of this project. On the other hand, Henrietta was pretty smart and looked into the future, and she bought a plot of land at the closest interchange for Route 64. She's going to build a new restaurant there. Well, one of the benefits of this particular project is that there will be a certain number of people stopping at that new restaurant, the new location, and they will be eating and spending money. And what are the benefits of that? Well, this is, you can see, what we do in this case is we simply draw a line through the costs and the benefits of the program because they're offsetting, and throw them out. So we throw out sunk costs and we throw out pecuniary costs and pecuniary benefits. Once we do that, we can total up. We total the, we add up all the benefits of the program, and we add up all the costs of the program. And once we do that, we want to see the course of action that has the highest percentage of benefits over costs. That is the course of action that we should choose for this project, whatever it might be. That's how we do a benefit cost analysis. Okay? All right, let's take a little break here, and we'll come back and we'll just do a quick view into budgeting and essentially what I'd like you to know about budgeting. We'll be back after this.